Have you ever felt overwhelmed, helpless, or frustrated while you were learning how to code? Well, you are no exception. Every single developer out there has had these feelings. Even I, a 21-year-old genius with almost 50 years of coding experience, still get overwhelmed, frustrated, and lose motivation all the time. But I know how to stop being sad and be awesome instead. True story. Hello and welcome, fellow coders. Thanks for joining me today to this very important topic. I would go so far and say it is probably the key of life. Okay, jokes aside now. I'm convinced that learning how to stay motivated is a key factor to your success of becoming and staying a happy software developer. If you have just started to learn how to code, or if you know some coding but are constantly stuck, or you keep learning and learning but you can't get to the next level, you probably at some point wanted to throw it all away and quit the idea of becoming a software developer, right? But here's the thing. Frustration is something that almost every single developer feels on a daily basis, especially in the beginning when you just start to learn how to code. So the first few months and years will be super frustrating for you. But where does this frustration come from? An Hungarian psychologist with this end boss of a last name came up with the concept of flow, which is a highly focused mental state. This is also sometimes referred to as being in the zone. I'm sure you have at some point in your life worked on something and time just flew by, right? Whoa, 4 o'clock in the morning. I was totally in the zone. The flow state can be explained by a simple graph. On the x-axis, we have the skill level of a person. On the y-axis, we have the challenge level of a task or problem. Imagine you would be given a task. You solve it and it is fairly challenging in the beginning. Then you solve a similar task and another one and another one and another one, all of the same challenge level. While your skill level increases, the challenge of your tasks almost stays the same. This will sooner or later start to bore you and will ultimately lead to demotivation. On the other hand, if the tasks you are trying to solve are way above your skill level, chances are that you start feeling anxious and your motivation goes down the drain. These are the two states that will make you lose your motivation. And of course, there's the golden middle. Well, actually the green middle. This is the perfect spot where the task is easy enough so you can handle it, while also being challenging enough so you don't get bored. This is where motivation is at its peak. So the problem now is, how do you get out of the zones where you lose motivation and into the zones where your motivation can thrive? That is exactly what we are going to cover today. Let's start by looking at tasks that are too easy. You might be also wondering, how can you become frustrated or demotivated if the task is too easy? Well, let me give you an example. Thomas. Yes, you've done some incredible work over the last few weeks. The service you wrote, a masterpiece. I think you are ready. You can now unlock your full potential and write the documentation. I know how my motivation would be like when in my head I would write this super awesome service using the coolest and newest technology out there, while in reality all I do is this. Unfortunately, writing documentation is part of the job, and sometimes you have to bite the bullet. But trust me, if all you do for weeks is describe how the code works without actually writing some, you will become bored, frustrated, and demotivated. Another very good example is if you have to do the same thing over and over and over again. Let's assume you have watched a tutorial and learned how to write a very basic REST service. Let's say for instance the classical to-do list. So instead of watching the next tutorial that shows you how to write a REST service, maybe spice things up and learn something new. Try writing a gRPC or GraphQL service, or maybe get rid of the relational database and use a NoSQL database like MongoDB. Even though this might not be the best technical fit for the problem at hand, you will still learn something new, and this will increase your motivation tremendously. So the key to getting out of boredom is to start challenging yourself. I know this sounds pretty simple and obvious, but trust me, it is way easier said than done. But before you storm off and rewrite 99% of your code, please don't. Do not go ahead and learn 10 new things all at once. This way, you will end up at the other line where the task at hand is too hard. This is actually something that a lot of people do when they learn how to code. Let's assume you have an idea for this awesome project where you take a bunch of stock data from different sources, bunch it together and store it in a database. Then you write an AI that predicts the future prices and show them off in a super fancy chart. And it also has to run in a Kubernetes cluster in the cloud. For obvious reasons, right? What could go wrong? I mean, you have the product basically right in front of you. But all you managed to learn so far is this. Trust me, 5 weeks in and you will be devastated with how far you have actually come with your project. If you are just starting to learn how to code, do not overwhelm yourself with projects that are way too big or too complex. This is a guarantee for failure, frustration and demotivation. But don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that you shouldn't have high expectations. Just be prepared that it will take a long time to get there and the learning curve will be incredibly steep. So take a step back and be realistic with what you already know and what you want to learn next. And always take one step at a time. Does the first or second project you are ever writing really have to run in a Kubernetes cluster? If you are barely able to store data in a database, maybe thinking about where the service? Thinking about how the service will run in the cluster might be 10 steps too far. So if you are constantly overwhelmed or frustrated while writing projects, my advice is the following. Focus on the fundamentals and understand them by heart. You do not have to remember everything. There is absolutely no shame in looking things up again. And to be honest, there are so many things that my brain simply refuses to store. If I had a penny for every time I had to look up the different types of joins in SQL, I wouldn't have to work a single day in my life again. Of course, I understand the difference in how they work. And yes, I've used many of these a gazillion times. But for whatever reason, something up here thinks that fun facts about cats are way more important than joining tables. So again, step 1, focus on the fundamentals. Step 2, focus on only one thing at a time. If you want to learn how databases work, only learn how databases work. Don't fall in the trap where you just learned how to store a user and you want to write the front end to interact with the database. I know that it can be super tempting to do that because you want to see results fast, right? No. Stop and stick to the plan. After you fully understood the fundamentals of SQL and a relational database like Postgres, then you can go ahead and learn how to write the front end. If you do not spend enough time learning the fundamentals of one technology and quickly go over to the next one, you will be starting to get overwhelmed, frustrated, and start losing motivation. Trust me, I was exactly at this place. I not only basically wasted the first 2 years of my professional career, but I also almost quit because of that. I spent months trying to force every single cool new thing that I learned into my projects. And indeed, I produced code, but I did not fully understand why it worked. Or worse, why it didn't work. I sometimes spent days debugging code that I simply copy and pasted off of the internet without actually understanding what it does, or let alone why a bug occurred because of it. This was an incredibly frustrating time for me, and I was this close to actually quitting my job as a software developer. After almost 2 years, I finally set my ego aside and decided to start from scratch. So I spent my evenings and weekends starting to learn the fundamentals again. First Java, then SQL, then design patterns, and so on and so forth. But I always made sure that I have read at least one book from start to finish about the topic at hand. By starting from scratch and learning the things that were appropriate for my skill level, I was able to get my motivation back. And that is what it's all about, right? Being and staying motivated. So coming back to our flowchart, it hardly ever looks like this. Most of the time, whenever it is you are learning something new, it's going to look more like that. So the key is, and that is crucial for your motivation when you're learning how to code, learn to recognize the signs. Whenever you feel underwhelmed or not challenged enough, take a different approach or technology. Just go ahead and make things a bit more difficult. But if on the other hand you feel overwhelmed or stuck, take a step back and focus on only one technology or language or whatever it is you are trying to learn. And don't drown yourself by learning 10 things at once. I know that all of this is way easier said than done, and it will take a lot of patience and practice. But if you are honest to yourself, listen to the signs and start acting accordingly, you will stay on track of the green line, stay in flow, and stay motivated. And for that, I really wish you all the best. And until next time, keep on coding.